Hey, hi, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining. So here we have Hemanth today. He will talk about Cloudera Data Catalog, and it will be going a very great session. Feel free to ask any question, any doubts you have in between, or you can post over the Zoom chat as well. He can address whenever he'll take a pause. And at the end of the session also, we will open for the question and answers. So thanks for joining. Over to you, Hemanth.
Thank you. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. And thanks for your time. Thanks for joining. And I hope to make this session as interesting as possible. This session is all about data protection, and some of the solutions that Cloudera offers in this space. So the way we are going to structure this particular meetup is that we are going to go through some things around what is data protection. We are going to look at some of the things around the regulatory landscape, some of the business impact and the compliance regarding the data protection laws. And I believe all of this is necessary to be able to provide a technical solution which is of value, correct? Nothing technical which is great can exist in vacuum. In the sense, it has to solve a particular real world problem. Then only you can say, okay, this is kind of worth implementing or studying. So technology by itself can't exist in isolation. So it has to be viewed in the context of the business and as well as the regulatory framework that it operates in. So with that orientation in place, let me start off with the next slide. Yeah. Okay, just to know, like, why data protection? And I mean, this has been a bit of a lot of buzz is created and a lot of issues are being basically announced or taken up every day, especially in the legal domain, just to how data is actually used, collected, processed. And let's take a few examples. For example, I mean, more so because data by itself is not of use, but it has information and you tend to extract some intelligence out of it. That is of value. So if you look at some of the things that goes around in our common lives, right? So we used to go to the grocery shop and used to pay and get the grocery, but these days people ask for the phone number. Now, is collecting phone number an essential part of this transaction? No, but we do end up giving that phone number. Sometimes we ask, sometimes we don't. There are things like, for example, if you live in an apartment, right? So there are some of these apps called neighborhood apps or the MyGate apps, which actually collect information. The way it is positioned is that you kind of say, okay, do you approve this person approaching your flat? But the fact remains that it is collecting information about who is visiting you and most probably for what purpose. And all this information is kind of private to you. So you don't know how that is getting used. Essentially, and we have the explosion of IoT devices right now. And the other day, this was for my friend, he was kind of traveling in a separate city altogether. And he got a call saying, like, there is something that you like, a variety of pizza, whatever, which is actually available to you 2 minutes from here. So that guy was surprised. Like, how did the system figure out that what I like is like very near to me? Right? Although it is of convenience, but it also scares you a bit, like somebody knows where I am, like, and what I'm doing. So all this gets factored in to say, okay, beyond a point, it's a little concerning. So that's why the data protection and the laws or the rules regarding this probably is becoming necessary. And no business can actually kind of say, I do not consider it as an essential compliance and ignore it. Yeah. Was that a question? Okay. So what some of the questions that it raises is, for what cause is the data getting captured? Who can access this data and who owns this data? So these are some of the questions that will need to be answered. Now, with respect to this, every country around the world has its own way of they are dealing with or trying to deal with this situation. So this is some, what you call a snapshot or a data that I could capture from the World Economic Forum. Like, if you look at it, each country is in a different stage of regulation, and each country has its own priorities when it comes to what they want to regulate. For example, European Union is a little more strict in terms of GDPR and its compliance. And they probably treat probably right to free speech at the same level as right to be forgotten or GDPR. But if you go to US, they probably treat right to speech a little higher than some of the things around right to be forgotten or the GDPR related stuff. So each country, depending on what they prioritize, have a different set of regulations, but broadly, they all are formulating laws in order to make sure that data is not used in a way that either threatens a person or even threatens governments. For example, basically, yeah. So all these basically boil down to a few things about protecting individual rights, right? Who can access this? Who can access this data, and does the individual have the right to ask for a deletion of data? Can an individual prevent portability of data? Can an individual say, like, for whatever purpose you have taken my data, what are you using it for? Are you using it for some kind of data processing? I do want to have a say on, say, like, you can use it for your purpose, but don't use it for any data processing purposes. And today we are having a lot of AI models, right? And do you want this data to be part of any automated decision that can be taken as part of machine learning? Now, just a week back, I think, if I read it correctly, Italy kind of banned Chat GPT-4, saying it's in gross violation of the GDPR sticks. So, I mean, this is an ongoing process, but there are individual rights, there is technology, there is data. So, there's a lot of things to consider. Now, if you consider the data protection and some of these things, many of these, we are still in the regulatory landscape right now. We will get into the business and the technical aspect of it. But I think all this is necessary for us to know when I try to design a technical solution of this. So one of the first or the earliest cases of that came to light was in Google Spain, where I think this was a case where somebody had taken a loan and he couldn't repay it, and this was announced in a newspaper, and subsequently things were auctioned, and furthermore, after that, the information was not relevant actually, but this used to show up in the search. And this guy actually went to the court and said, look, this information is no longer relevant. So why does it still show up in the search? It kind of affects me. It is done with, it has no meaningful value to anyone. So they should not be shown. So the court actually said in its first, like, yeah, we see some merit in this, so this has to be taken down. But things go on with appeals and stuff. But I think this was one of the first cases where somebody in Spain said, okay, the individual has the right. Then there was a case in Germany where somebody, a criminal convict, was served the jail and has gone through all the processes. I believe in Germany, there is a basic fundamental right that the man has the ability to reform, correct? He can start his own new life and he can forget his past. So if something of this order is always coming up on the search engine, it is affecting his fundamental right to reform and lead a normal life. So he said, this needs to be taken down. Now, let me skip the third one. I'll go to the fourth one. Fourth one is, from my reading, an interesting case where non-compliance actually resulted in a monetary fine of around 600,000 euros. And this impacts businesses, right? So if non-compliance results in monetary fine, apart from obviously other noise it generates, it is going to affect the company finances and balance sheet. So the importance of data protection and the regulation is that any business can't ignore this. So we need to have processes and audits and things in place so that we are using data for what it is and we are not in cross violation of any of the local laws that exist. I think this is more in the context of India. I taken this particular news paper clipping from LiveMint. I think India still does not have a data protection law which is passed in the parliament, but it has been in the works for some time now. But still, some of the things that are being propagated or discussed around is how non-compliance can lead to fines, like for example, 4% of the global turnover, or 2% of the global turnover. The essential point to take from this is that non-compliance will lead to monetary fines apart from other non-monetary limelight, which is not so desired. So given that there are different geographies, different laws, different kinds of regulations to be complied with for any organization, right? So it is important to know where my data actually lies, right? If you don't know where the data lies, obviously you can't really do anything or manage the data properly. So that is, I think, a very fundamental point that needs to be addressed. Know the location of your data, and especially if you're a global organization, your data center is spread all over the world. How do I know as quickly as possible any data with respect to a certain person or a certain individual or a certain organization? Where does it rest? And once you know the location of the data, if we are able to kind of attach some policy on the data, now this policy is basically a distilled form of any regulations that apply either locally or globally. That would actually help comply with any local regulations or global regulations. Now, broadly, these two things, knowing where your data is and to be able to attach policy on top of the data and to be able to actually scale that, probably will help you kind of mitigate much of the compliance related activities. Now, how does Data Catalog, which is an offering from Cloudera, try to help solve some of this? What does Data Catalog provide? It provides a single plane of view of data from the AI. These are some of the screenshots that I've taken. So it's actually from the actual application. So if you see on the left side, which is DMARC, it's actually connecting to a lot of data lakes. Each of those radio button values that you see is a different data lake. Okay, so you are able to search across multiple data lakes, irrespective of which geography it is. So this is a single plane view of data. This solves your problem. Like, I should be able to search my data where it is. Once you are able to search data, I should be able to kind of go back to the earlier slide. I should be able to kind of attach some kind of a policy to the data. Right? There are data, for example, if I take there will be Hive tables, there will be HBase tables, there will be normal HDFS files, all kinds of data will be there. Now, how do I, for example, identify if this particular table has sensitive data? So I should be able to kind of, through one or multiple means, run some kind of an automation or a processing on the data and have some kind of an auto tagging functionality on top of it. So here is like for example, in Data Catalog, there are multiple ways in which you can try to do an auto tagging. So one way is you can set up regexes. For example, if you have a database or a table where you store passport related information, right? So you can put up regexes and say, okay, define regexes and then say, why don't I run this rule on every table that I have and automatically identify which of these particular columns have passport related information. So out of the box, we kind of ship around 72 regexes covering social security numbers, as well as passport, emails, IP addresses, and all that. Apart from that, if you want to kind of create custom algorithms, right? So not every logic can be captured in the regex. So you kind of say, I'll create a custom algorithm and plug into the system, and I want this logic to be able to run on a particular table or a database or a file system and identify sensitive information. I should be able to do that. So broadly, you should have some kind of a rule creation mechanism on the data and possibly able to run it to identify or auto identify the data. For example, in this case, I am probably saying, okay, why don't I create a rule and assign these tags, sensitive and compliance, on whatever entities this rule is attached. We will come to that. So once I have a rule, in Data Catalog, we have got a sensitive profiler where you can set up a cron job and say, what are all the tables on which you want to run these profilers to identify the sensitive data? And against what is how many days you want to make sure that you don't rerun it, what is the schedule and all that. Depending on this particular profiler is going to run the logic on the 5 tables and then auto identify the tags to be applied on the tables. So this is a screenshot where on a particular table, the profiler ran and identified that certain columns in here are likely to be passport numbers belonging to a particular country. And this is suggested in the sense that if you are a data steward or a data officer in a company, you can actually go and kind of cross-check, okay, whether what is suggested here is correct or not and accept it or reject it. But the more important point here is, once you have created a rule and the rule is run on a periodic basis on the table or the data, it is able to auto tag any of the columns which it feels is a sensitive information based on certain regex patterns of custom logic. Now, why this tagging is important is because once you can tag the information, you can then create policies in Ranger based on these tags. Now, this is how you can introduce policy on a particular data. I mean, as I said, every country comes up with a different kind of regulation. Some of them seem similar, some of them different. You can't go on creating, for example, a system. The system should be generic enough to say, I want to apply a certain policy on a certain data in a certain country and not be able to do that in another country. I think tagging combined with authorization policies within Ranger is going to help give that generic optionality to be able to comply with the rules that is required in the native. Apart from that, as an organization, right, you also want to make sure that who in my organization is accessing what data and what time, how many times it was accessed. So this is more for the audit purposes. Now, all this information that you see here is actually derived from Ranger. Ranger is, for example, if you can turn on the audit logs, it actually gives you a lot of information on who accessed it, whether access was denied, from which IP it was accessed, and if it was denied, according to which policy it was denied. So I think there has been a lot of work that has gone into reinter, and some of this information is actually mined to show to the data steward that this is how a particular user is accessing the particular table and what are all the kind of operations that are happening on that particular table. Now, what this also means that you can actually add some intelligence on top of the system, saying if you figure out that a certain user, machine user or a non-machine user, is trying to access a particular table and there is frequent denials happening, probably you want to set up an alarm or alarm system saying this is somebody who is trying to have access to the data, which we should not be doing. Right? So you can plug in those custom logics and prevent any kind of data theft from happening. So this is also a screenshot from the application where you can actually see a range of policy getting applied. If you see the first two rows, this is a particular user who has logged in. He has only access to certain databases. And for the other one, which is T-marked, is basically not shown like certain information on who owns it, when it is created. This way, you are able to make sure, this is just an example, how you can use the combination of tags and range of policies to enable this on the data catalog. So before I get into the technical aspects of this and explain how this is all done, is there any questions around what we have gone through so far?
Hemanth, one question around the identification of any, I would say, incorrect pattern of data access. Right now, data catalog only gives you that this information is this access was denied or it was allowed, right?
Yes.
But right now, we do not have a system where we can plug in these alarms. So how this can be accomplished? Are there some customers who are doing it?
No, this is just an extension. What I meant was, obviously, it is not there right now, but it can be used. We can build or plug in systems which can be used to what we call satisfy some of these use cases.
Okay.
I mean, I didn't mean it exists right now. I say like we can use it. I mean, nothing stops us from having.
Yeah, right. Yeah, because we have the source, or I would say the event which gives us this this data, and then we can build on top of that. I was just curious that by using the same pattern, do we have any customers who are actually leveraging this kind of, or they have built this kind of solution for them? Because this does sound like it could be an important feature going forward in the data catalog as well, right?
Yes, it could be, but none as of right now. It was just that while I was going through some of the see, data theft is also important, right? So it's in what you call unauthorized access is something that we need to, as an organization, some people need to be vigilant about. So I thought an extension of what we already have in data catalog, we can actually have some alerting system which can be pretty real time actually.
Correct.
But those events are like put in a log somewhere. So if they had like Dynatrace or Datadog or something, they could set those alerts up in their metrics and alerting system. They couldn't.
Yeah, I thought Pulse might be able to give us even better real-time thing, because if I'm not wrong, data catalog generates this data upon certain hours of interval, and it takes so it might not be as real-time as the data that is getting collected on Pulse. So yeah, just an observation.
Yeah, it could be. But generally I've set it to 2 minutes, but 2 minutes also is not that real time. So Pulse may have it right.
Okay.
Kind of not aware, maybe it's really good. Okay. Any other questions? Okay, now I'll probably move to a little bit of technical things in here. So if you consider like n node cluster, right? So we probably can divide it into two parts, elements which are concerning the data governance, which is actually most probably always in our case a combination of Atlas, Ranger, and Knox, and then another cluster which is compute related. Now the reason is I just want to make sure that I back. Okay, let me take this. Okay, so if you consider, for example, a H-base table, right? So or a Hive table, and if you want to figure out the sensitive information in that, you are running some kind of a rules and figuring out what is sensitive information, though this is compute intensive. Now, Data Catalog as a solution is hosted currently on cloud, and what resources that you use and how much time you use is important. And hence, you should have the ability to be able to run the jobs which will identify the sensitive information. And you should be probably able to shut down the compute or stop it when it is not required. This is purely from the billing and the resource usage point of view. So in that sense, our current data catalog solution, which can be hosted on AWS or Azure or GCP, comes with a data lake concept or a SDX concept where Atlas, Ranger, Knox, and all these components are always up and running. And whenever we want to kind of process and identify sensitive information and tag it, we spin up a compute cluster and then run the required rules on top of the data. Once the data processing happens, all this data, right, whatever is sensitive information is actually pushed to Atlas. So Atlas will be the store for all the metadata information. And you can bring on the compute. Broadly, this diagram is trying to explain that whatever is in green is all the SDX components, which generally should be always up and running because you want to make sure that the authorizations related are always keeping irrespective when the data is getting access from the data lake. And compute, which is in orange, is something that a user can or a business can stop it, or whenever they want, they can spin it up and run the logic that is required. The exact flow in which this happens is probably, this is a more detailed view. Let's say I'll take you back to this particular, before I go, particular configuration which we set up so that we can relate to this. This was a particular rule that we created, right? So we said there's a cron schedule attached to it. We said this particular profiler should be running on a particular, any table which contains the value marketing or any DV which is equal to some bank value. So this is a cron that has been set up. So in here, so whenever the particular scheduler is active, it's going to basically pick up all those, in this case, Hive, but it can be HBase also. Or you can probably tomorrow support any other table that you want, even a file system if you want. Pick up the qualifying tables from Hive and create an input request via Livy, submit a Spark job to Yarn. This is the data. What you see in orange is what is actually happening in the compute. What you see in green is the SDX element or persistent file systems. Now, once the processing is done, the output of that is actually stored as event on the file system. Now, if your cluster is running on AWS, it would be S3. If it is Azure, it would be AVPS, or it can also be HDFS if you are running it on a bare metal data set. So once the table and the data within the table is processed for sensitive information and the output of that is identified, it is stored in an event store, and from there it is pushed to Atlas. As we know, Atlas is the component to store all the metadata related to all the entities. And in this case, we have used Atlas to store all the tags that are identified or the tables or the columns that are identified as sensitive. Using tags that are pushed to Atlas, we then define the tag rules in Ranger. Now, this combination of being able to tag information and create routes in Ranger is actually a very important one, and I think centrally very important, because this is what ultimately helps you achieve compliance, which is required from the business perspective. Now, once the tag rules are applied or the tag rules are created, the authorization kicks in depending on how the rules are written in Ranger. And subsequently, that gets reflected in the data catalog application or any other application which intends to consume this. Any questions around any of the components here? So some of the, now that we have seen that we know who can access data, who has access data, when it was accessed, we can be able to search the information in Data Lake. Let's look at some of the cases related to pharma industry, and especially in the pharma industry, right? So clinical trials collect a lot of personal information. Now, this is way more than any probably you will collect in retail or any other vertical. Now, obviously, this being used in the clinical trials and in the research purposes, you do want to make sure that some of the sensitive information is identified, and you want to set up policies to say, okay, who can view it and who cannot view it. So, and also once you identify the sensitive data, you may want to, for example, if you feel that name or an email ID or even for that matter, gender, you want to not expose, you may want to anonymize. So before you want to anonymize all that data, you want to make sure that which tables you want or which data you want to anonymize. For that, you will have to make sure that you can create the corresponding rule and run that rule on that particular entity or table and figure out, okay, there are certain columns or tables here which need to be anonymized. Let's say you tag it as anonymized and use that tag in Ranger, for example, to say, don't show me whoever queries for this particular information, don't show them or blank it. Right? You can put up a certain rule. Or if you want to extract some data, don't actually kind of, let's say you put it as star rather than showing up any value. Or you can run some other logic also. If you identify a certain column as name, you want to kind of say, create another column where you kind of completely give a pseudonym to the actual person's name. So if you want to run certain logic, you can probably make use of the tagging mechanism available and write a custom job which can extend or alter the existing table to come up with a new kind of data. Data retention. This is also one of the issues or challenges. So if you have collected, this comes under the bracket that if you are collecting data, the purpose for which you are collecting data is important. And once the purpose for which the data is collected no longer is valid, many regulations say you should no longer be storing it or using it. So in that sense, how do I ensure compliance with this particular thing? So you then figure out, okay, what are the class of data where this data retention regulation applies? You probably create a regex saying, okay, for X kind of data, we should probably run a rule on the particular table, and probably you say you should tag it as retain not until, let's say, December 2023. Once this tagging information is done on certain data, you can have a regular job that is running, which will say, okay, give me all the data which is in the past and where the retention period is gone or in the past. And you can go ahead and purge that data. Now, this is also important because, again, as I said, for compliance purposes, you don't want to retain data beyond what it is mandated. There is another example. For example, there are many companies in pharma where they do contract research. If you take okay, not taking names. For example, a company in the pharma space may actually take up contract research for multiple other companies, and they may only have one data lake spawned. And now you are to make sure that contract research data pertaining to company A should not be viewed by any person who is working with the research on data from company B. How do you do that? So that kind of data isolation within the data lake can be possible using the range of policies, and then make sure that whoever logs in is able to see only the data that he is supposed to view. These are some of the specific examples within the pharma industry where we need to be able to locate the data, tag the data, and then with that, what you call the technical possibility in place, we can achieve all these use cases, compliance for all these use cases. Any questions on this slide, or any other use cases that you think of in any other industry that's worth discussing here?
Okay.
That's all I had from my end. I'm kind of open to any questions right now, if there are any.
Feel free to ask any questions, or if you want to share your experience and your ideas about it. So that will be really great to hear.
Hemanth, this is Srinivas here. I had one question. So going forward, there is a concrete plan to have data catalog made available to the customers in the private cloud world. So what will be the end user experience for data catalog customers? I'm just asking in the interest of information.
That I think it should be agnostic. It should not depend what cluster you are viewing, correct? So,
Okay. So Srinivas, for private cloud, our mandate is to deliver everything just accordance with what we have on public cloud, except AWS Glue Data Catalog, which is also one of the feature in public cloud. Everything and every experience should be made available over there. Having said that, there is also a plan. I think Ashish has yet to give us PRD and last mile product details for that. We are going to revamp our homepage. Currently, the moment you click on data catalog, you land on a search page. Sometimes it is not very intuitive for user to understand that what to do with this. So we are planning to have a new homepage as well. Again, this is just a discussion around going on. I'm not sure that when it is going to be put into pipeline, or when the product requirement is going to be completed. If that happens, this would go on public cloud first, and the expectation is the same feature parity should also go in the private cloud. So in terms of experience or whatever the new changes that are coming up, this is what we have. This is for the next 2 quarters at least.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Ankur. Thank you, Hemanth.
Are we good then? Is there any further questions? Okay, cool. Then yeah, thanks for attending. Thank you so much, Hemanth. Thank you.